Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are the most divisive video game remakes that I've ever seen, with literal review scores all over the place. And to that I say, okay, I'll be real with you guys. You've seen the title. These games clearly didn't woo me. In fact, I thought these were the most disappointing Pokémon games that I've ever played. But at least hear me out first and understand why I have come to these conclusions about this game. I know it's a long video, but everything will make sense at the end, so I'm just asking you to not draw any conclusions midway, as I'll get to explaining it later. And I'm not here to just blindly bash the game, because I'm gonna elaborate and provide evidence on all aspects of these remakes that I thought fell flat on how this game turned out. Like, you gotta understand, guys, I'm gonna criticize remakes of some of my favorite Pokemon games of all time. So trust me, I really don't want to do this either, but these games just pushed me over the edge. I actually liked these games so much back in the day that I even bought both versions, the Platinum Remake, the Player's Guide, and even the guide to completing the National Dex. Like, look at all this stuff here. Social distancing? Psst, who needs that? I show this collection to any woman and they won't come even close to 6 feet near me. Okay, but back on topic here. I think to fully understand where I'm coming from on the matter, we have to go back and look at the very first Pokemon remake that was ever made. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green for the Game Boy Advance that came out in 2004. This was a remake of the very first games, Pokemon Red and Green on the original Game Boy. The most current Pokemon games at the time were Ruby and Sapphire, so in order to make these games on par with those games, they incorporated every innovation to the Pokemon series into these games. Things like having the special stat being split up into special attack and special defense, Pokemon holding items, and the new types included. Plus, they updated the graphics to match this generation too, making this really feel like the old games were brought into the current generation. On top of all of this, a lot of improvements for the pacing have been made too. They added this whole new section consisting of 7 new islands to explore that was between the final 2 gyms, as it was kinda weird fighting these gyms one after another. And this just added a bunch of new content to the game too. So some key takeaways from this remake was that it had noticeably improved graphics that matched the current Pokemon generation, new areas and gameplay sections, and improvements to the game's pacing. I'll just write this down for now, but don't worry, it'll come into play later. So we move over to the next generation of Pokemon, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. And this time they remade the generation that came right after Red and Green, Gen 2 with Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Like the previous games, the graphics were a huge improvement here and matched the style for the other Gen 4 games. The originals were already loaded with content, packing 2 regions in it, but even so, they still added some new areas. There was most notably the new Safari Zone and 2 new routes that led up to it. And this Safari Zone had Pokemon that weren't catchable in the original, and they also added new Pokemon to catch in many of the routes too. But there was a third game, Pokemon Crystal, that came out after the original Gold and Silver that made a bunch of new improvements and features to those games back then. So when making Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it only made sense to include those improvements as well to make these the definitive versions of Johto. And these were things like the whole Suicune plot and such. On top of this, so many trainers Pokemon, Pokemon levels, and even moves were all tweaked to better balance out the game, as some parts in the original could be a bit too easy or hard. So the key improvements here was that they added the improvements from Crystal, there's new wild Pokemon to catch, and many opponents' Pokemon teams were tweaked as well. Then the final set of remakes after these were Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. These came out after X and Y in the 6th generation of Pokemon games. And once again, the graphics were in the same style of this generation. However, this time it was a huge upgrade as they took the original 2D game and now made it fully 3D for the first time, which fully justified the graphical upgrade. On top of that, they went above and beyond in certain areas to create new objects in this game that really spiced up these locations. This really shines in the gyms, how they added a bunch of things in these areas that really drive home the theme of this place. And they added a brand new post-game known as the Delta episode. This offered a new story, characters, and just interesting scenarios. Plus, this game went out of its way to redesign pretty well every single character in the game, from minor NPCs to the main story characters. Everyone has a fresh coat of paint, which really brings this game into the modern era. And even certain locations were tweaked, like how they turned the tiny Mauville city into this, well, actually big city. Plus you could even fly across the entire map, which was made into this like 3D mini scale version of it, which was a lot of fun too. Also, at this point in the Pokemon series, they started to include new gimmicks of sorts in the main games. And for this generation, they included Mega Evolutions, so they also included them in these remakes as a mechanic and incorporated them into the story, plus they even created new Mega forms for certain Hoenn Pokemon. So the key takeaways from these remakes were having new visuals that spice up the old areas, redesigning a lot of the old characters and towns, and bringing over the gimmick from the main games. Okay, so I'm gonna put this list away for now, but bear with me here guys, I will definitely get back to it and you'll see why I'm doing this. And this is basically the key things that I thought the Pokemon remakes did well. I'd say overall, these previous remakes felt like they took a game from an older generation and brought it into the current gen of Pokemon. But after the Ruby and Sapphire remakes, Pokemon games in general just kinda started to go downhill. We got Sun and Moon, which were decent games, but people thought that they made the series way more handholdy and linear, which killed the exploration and difficulty here. Then they had sequels to those with little to no changes from the original, making it seem like they just re-released the same game again. And after that came the Let's Go games. These games were technically remakes, but were kind of half spin-off games that incorporated the Pokemon Go catching mechanic into the main game to presumably get Pokemon Go fans into this series. While this game I thought was still a step down from the other remakes, it still brought some cool ideas to the table and had its own identity. It had a different way to capture Pokemon now, and it got rid of wild encounters and just had Pokemon walking around in the world. And after that, we come to the most current Pokemon games, Sword and Shield. Now these were super divisive. It had a lot of the same complaints from Sun and Moon, like the linear routes and easy difficulty, but this game also had just a lack of polish throughout, unlike we've ever seen before, with a lot of glitches and poor looking visuals. This made the game seem rushed more than anything. So let's just say after a few of these games, a lot of people felt like the quality of Pokemon games were at a low point, and many longtime Pokemon fans felt more and more alienated from the series. But then, there was a glimmer of hope. Rumors were starting about the Diamond and Pearl remakes that were coming out soon. The last mainline remakes were awesome, and the fundamentals of Diamond and Pearl were great. So if they combine that with the current generation's graphics, which would be Sword and Shield, then this remake could be the jump start to get the Pokemon series back on track. Plus, it was also being outsourced by another company this time, so Game Freak potentially realized that the last games, Sword and Shield, were rushed and are planning to make these games out in a smarter method now. Also, this was the first time in years where they took a break in the yearly Pokemon releases, so it looked like Game Freak was taking the previous criticisms into mind and really taking their time for the highly anticipated remake to blow it out of the water. Everything was super hopeful, the stars were aligned, this was the moment that all of the fans of Generation 4 have been waiting all our lives for, and when the game was finally shown off...
What? What? No!
No!
No! Why does it look like this?
He's so base. What the f is that? No! Why does it look like that? What is this?
Why does it look like that? They look like it looks like a mobile game.
Oh my god, it's hideous. Oh my god, I cannot wait for people to lose their f***ing minds. It's so ugly.
It's, well, it's certainly remade. Okay, it lives up to the name. But, what a disappointment the graphics looked right off the bat. And to be fair, some people were happy in the reveal, but I've never seen such a divisive initial response. But you know what, the first impressions are nothing. That was just the reveal. I've played and beaten the game fully now, so let's dive right into this game. And why don't we start with talking about the graphics, shall we? Instead of matching the visuals of the current gen, which would be Sword and Shield here, they decided to go for a more chibi style in the overworld. And after playing this game, I personally think that this looks bad if I'm gonna be honest. There's just something about the style combined with the lighting and textures that makes it already seem like dated graphics. There was definitely some lost in translation here. What looked good as a 2D sprite turned out a lot more goofy when directly remaking it like this. This honestly reminds me of the My Sims games, and I really don't want to be reminded of those. And listen, I'm not opposed to seeing new or interesting art styles in these remakes if they don't want to match the current gen's look, but it has to be good. This style just doesn't work at all for this game. And it's a shame because you'll be watching a cutscene with Dialga that looks epic up on the spear pillar, and then it cuts to Cyrus and he just looks ridiculous. I can't take this scene seriously anymore. You know who he reminds me of now? Stewie Griffin. I just want to give this guy a teddy bear. This little guy is really supposed to destroy the galaxy. Aw, that's cute. But seriously, the main problem with these graphics is that they literally made a one-to-one conversion of 2D graphics into a 3D space. So things that looked normal in 2D look completely unnatural or off in this game. And it especially doesn't help when they zoom the camera into these tiny little characters and you just see how lifeless they stand there. Plus you can even see how low res the texture looks on their faces. Speaking of the textures, some of them look pretty off-putting as well. There's something about the breakable rocks and strength rocks that make it seem just very flat to me. It looks like, you know, the original Smash Brothers, how the items would be 2D and then everything else in 3D? Well yeah, these rocks look 2D to me for some reason. Especially with the Spirit Tomb hole. This is a 2D image. You can't convince me otherwise. Just look how it doesn't fit here at all. And then the characters and cutscenes look so stiff when they move around. Like you can move off the grid when you're playing, which is good, but the NPCs are still stuck on a grid. This looks so ridiculous and jarring when they awkwardly have to turn in a cutscene. But what's so disappointing about these graphics is how they could do so much more. In the anime and other forms of media, we've always been teased about playing these areas in an actual game. We'd see these beautiful towns from the anime and be like, oh look, it's Floroma Town, that's what the place from the video game looks like. And I think the general consensus was that the anime is what the world actually looks like, and the games are more scaled down representations of these areas because of limitations in the hardware. But now we have the technology to make something grander, more like a real place. And while Sword and Shield does have its own visual flaws, the actual cities in it all look amazing. They're creative and seem like places people would actually live in. So when the hype was generating about new Diamond and Pearl remakes that were gonna have Sword and Shield graphics with all your favorite cities from the original, and then we got areas that are one-to-one with the original, are very grid-based, and just look plopped together, you can see how it was a disappointment. But the other half of a Pokémon remake is the new additions that they added to make it more justified to remake the game and make it feel like the old game is being brought into the current generation. And for its credit, this game does have a few of them. You can swap Pokémon at any time with your boxed PC Pokémon, and the best one for sure is that you don't have to teach HM moves to your Pokémon. But it's kind of weird because other innovations they just didn't include for some reason. Like TMs are now single use again? Huh? This was such an old innovation too. I haven't had to deal with breakable TMs since the original games of these remakes. Well, okay, technically it's Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but those were from the same generation. And now moves once again require a heart scale to be relearned rather than just going up to someone and having a move relearned. And then finally, wild Pokemon are just back again instead of having them roam around. Like roaming Pokemon was one of my favorite new additions to the series and it's randomly not here. Other than that, they only really added some rooms in the underground to catch wild Pokemon, and that is pretty cool, I will say that. And then also you can collect these new statues for your secret base. Oh, and they made it so you can catch a few legendaries in the post games, so that's cool, but that's also about it. Okay, fine, they did bring back Follow Pokemon, which I like as well, albeit it is kind of glitchy because they don't keep up with you at all, and they finally made Pokemon Contest into some rhythm game. Yeah, I don't know, these seem like all minor additions. They didn't actually update anything from the core of Pokemon, so there's virtually no new content in that regard. And this new stuff is kind of cool when you actually break it down, but at the end of the day, it's really just some rooms in the underground, some revamped minigames, and you can capture new Pokemon. But the most baffling decision of this remake was to not include any content from Platinum. Like, I know these are remakes of Diamond and Pearl and not Platinum, but Platinum was essentially the remake of Diamond and Pearl. When Game Freak made the third game or sequel, they would take the initial game, fix its flaws based on feedback, and then add some more content to make it now the definitive version of the generation. And Pokemon Platinum did that job perfectly. Like, who makes a game initially, remakes it again to fix its flaws, and then remakes it again but bases it on the first version, flaws and everything included? So now you have problems with the game that you brought back that had already been fixed in Platinum over 10 years ago. What kind of ass backward logic is that? The original Ghost Gym puzzle was one I really don't think the initial developers were too happy with. You literally just solve some math questions. So when they had the chance to fix it, they made this awesome Ghost Light puzzle in Platinum that fit the gym a lot better. So why did they remake the math puzzle in Brilliant Diamond? That makes no sense. And this is just one example. There are also other gym puzzles that were untouched as well. The gym order is now back to what it originally was, in which people complained about the pacing because of that, and there was no Platinum Battle Frontier either. And that's just its flaws. Platinum had a lot more new content too, that was all not included in these remakes. And okay, a common counter argument being said is that this game is supposed to be faithful, that's why nothing is changed. But if you think about it, it's only selectively faithful. The fact that they have the new experience share way of getting experience, is that faithful? Or how Pokemon don't need to learn HM moves anymore, that's different from the original. But then if someone brings up how TMs are single use again, well then people just say, ah well, it's because it's faithful. So it seems that people only use faithfulness when it benefits their argument. Which makes me think that saying the game is faithful is simply used to deflect attention away from the game's flaws when they're brought up. But at least the original glitches have to be fixed, right? Aw, you gotta be kidding me. Guys, I think you're taking this faithfulness a little too far when you include the original glitches in it. Okay, in all seriousness, these glitches aren't from the original, but they still created new glitches here. And these just show a real lack of polish that I see throughout the entire game. So much so that this whole project seems incredibly rushed to me. Just look at the animations for the HM moves. They literally look unfinished. The rock climb one is an absolute joke. Your character just stands there lifeless while he slides up this slope. He's not even on the barrel, like come on. And don't even get me started with the clipping in the Surf HM. Literally every object you collide with, you clip into. Listen, these are things that are so obvious, so apparent that the people had to have noticed them and just not fixed them due to time constraints or whatever. Honestly, a lot of stuff just clips into each other now that I think of it. Even required cutscenes like this guy talking to you, he'll first clip into the whole staircase here. I'm not even doing obscure actions or anything, I'm just literally talking to the required NPCs and using the required HMs in the game. But at least these don't affect the gameplay, right? Well, until you discover in this Snow Point gym that if you go to this area here, then you're stuck. There is absolutely no way out. So you'll just have to turn your console off and go back to a previous save if you have autosave turned off, that is. And if you save in here, well, that's it. That's a soft lock. You have to delete your entire save file on Switch and start all over. Damn, I wish I could just skip this whole gym puzzle and save myself the headache. Oh wait, you can do that too. What? Was anything tested in this game? And just the hitboxes feel so off as well. They're way bigger than the objects, so I always get stuck all the time on things I can't even see. And this makes simply moving around in this world awkward and not fun to control. Okay, so I think it's about time to go back to the initial list that I made with the previous remakes and start another one based on what these remakes did so we can directly compare the two. So starting with the graphics, I know when comparing them, it is kind of subjective, but I still think it's fair to say that these have divisive graphics that don't match the current gen, whereas the other remakes all had noticeable improvements. Then when looking at the new areas, there wasn't any in the main world. However, I'll give them that there was new rooms in the underground to catch Pokemon, and a few new rooms to catch legendaries post-game. But this still falls flat to the new routes and areas that we've seen before. And then the pacing wasn't fixed at all, which was a complaint I had with the original. As for the improvements included from Platinum, there are none. I mean, not much to say here, so that's pretty disappointing. Then regarding the new Pokemon you can catch, the main world Pokemon are totally untouched. All wild Pokemon are exactly the same for the main game, but there was a ton of new ones in the underground, so that's pretty sweet at least. As for the trainers, teams, and levels, this is actually the point I was the most happy with, as the main boss battles all have new moves and items, which is refreshing. But then we get to the new visuals that used to spice up the old areas, and for these, there is literally nothing done here, which really sucks as a lot of these places look way more bland in 3D and could have really used some more detail. And then for the final two, we got no redesigns for any of the characters or towns, and no inclusion of the gimmicks introduced in Sword and Shield. So those were unfortunately some more letdowns. So, when finally comparing these two lists of the key things Pokemon Remakes used to do versus what this one did, while in most of these cases it fails to satisfy these points, except for a few instances. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not asking nor expecting to do all of these things for the list, but it seems so far off the ball in what people want from a remake and what had already been done well in previous remakes. Like, at the end of the day, on its own, these games are just very okay and safe remakes. But Pokemon Remakes used to be the gold standard in what video game remakes should be. To not just remake a game square for square, but to take an older game and bring it into the modern era to make it feel just as new as other modern games. Whereas these ones still feel like they're stuck in Generation 4. And now other companies are doing what Pokemon used to do with their remakes and are generally met with critical and commercial success. Just look at the Final Fantasy VII or Resident Evil 2 remakes. The Pokemon Company used to be ahead of the curve at doing this, and now they're falling behind the pack. And considering how the Pokemon series has recently seemed to only release divisive or lacking in content games when comparing to what they've released before, this just seemed like such a great way to finally appeal to both old and new Pokemon fans. Because they've already established such a great formula to remaking games. But instead we got a game that's a literal one-to-one replica of the original with little to no content, no third game inclusions, glitches everywhere, graphics that really don't seem like an improvement, and gameplay that feels exactly the same as before. And that is why I find Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl to be such disappointing remakes.